All right, everyone, I have Kelly Smith here, and I'm excited to chat with her. She is a certified yoga teacher, meditation teacher, and the host of the podcast, Mindful in Minutes. She knows a lot about the health benefits of meditation, which I don't know that much about. I feel like you know that it probably helps reduce stress in some capacity, and we all know that stress is harmful for you. But in meditation can kind of almost be like one of those triggering words for people listening. They're like, oh, meditation, like how I can't just like sit there in silence. Like, what does that even mean? So I'm really excited to dive into it with Kelly today. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Hi, how are you doing?
Pretty good. Besides, like I said, just being out of breath constantly.
Yeah, we we're both for audio only people. We're both pregnant and kind of hiding from our kids right now.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Yeah, but I loved just kind of like reading a little bit about your story. I feel like people go into fields usually like they're drawn to something because they've been through something or it's helped them through something. So then they want to use that tool to help others. And again, like I really want to dive into like some things with meditation because I know for me it can be like, oh, meditating. I don't want to like just sit there and pay attention to my breath. Like people get really restless. But I was actually listening to a little bit of your meditations before we hopped on, and I really like them. I like guided meditations. So like if I have to sit there by myself, I'm less likely to do it. But I love that you have this like meditation in minutes podcast because you can literally just pop one of those on and have a guided meditation and it feels really nice.
oh, I'm so happy to hear that because I think sometimes I also love guided meditations, and so much of what you're saying is resonating with me and things that I hear often. Like I imagine, Liz, that you have there's things like when you go to a dinner party that you could just like talk about. I imagine
Mhm.
yours around like birth and like
Yes.
being
Yes.
things where it's like in your corner of the world, like you talk
Yes.
about these things day in and day out. Like meditation's my thing.
Mhm.
And I love to help people realize that it's not that hard, it's not that serious. And often people think guided meditations are somehow like cheating,
Mhm.
which it's not. It's just
Yeah.
listening like you go to a yoga class or you go anywhere you go to a birthing class and you have like a teacher that's like leading you through some kind of an exercise. So I'm really happy to talk about all of that because this is the thing that if we're sitting next to each other at dinner party, I'm going to tell you about it.
Yeah. Right, right, right. I know. My husband actually just like the other day, well, I guess the 4th of July was like just yesterday. Yeah, I guess yesterday. But the weekend was this last weekend, and his parents had a bunch of people over. So I was talking to like his second cousin, and he was telling me about like his wife's birth, and like my husband just walks up and he hears me talking and he just walks away. And then later he's like, "Why were you talking to him about cervical exams?" I'm like, babe, because we got into it. You know that this happens at like
it,
every function.
it
So
happens. Mine's always like my husband's like, "Oh, did you have a nice chat about unlocking the true self?" I'm like, "Well, yes, I did. Thank you." Like we had a great
yes,
time talking about
we
that.
did. And they're very welcome. So
Yes.
yeah. So how did you get into all of this?
So I started really with yoga first, was kind of how I was, started on this journey. I started yoga when I was like young, before I could even drive as like a form of cross training for my sports. And then when I was 16, my mom was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. And I was her primary caregiver at that time. And that's when I was really introduced. I didn't even really know it was meditation at that time, but I was kind of introduced to like these principles or these ideas of like guided visualization or like focusing on your breath or like the mind body connection and like how important that is. And that kind of piqued my interest in it, but I still felt that kind of societal pull to still go and check all the boxes. So I ignored that and pushed that passion down deep and, went to college, checked the boxes, found a nice man to marry that I married after college, all of that. But then once I graduated, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. So I did what many do, and I took a yoga teacher training. And again, this idea of like meditation came up. And I've always loved both of those practices. But it wasn't until a few years after becoming a yoga teacher, this is like the Spark Notes version, where I moved for love to I call it a one bar, one Walmart town.
Hmm.
There were, I guess, like three bars and one Walmart, but
Yeah. I grew
it
I grew
was
up I grew up in a place like that.
yes. So and we had moved from like Minneapolis, and I had to leave everything, no family, no friends. I'd leave my job, all of that. I was from my husband was in med school at the time, and I felt like it was this opportunity to maybe revisit and pursue a dream. Like I'd been given a clean slate, and that's when I really started to dive deep into kind of more of the introspective practices, so meditation, returning to that kind of mind body connection, and ultimately ended up opening a studio there. And it's just kind of evolved ever since, and it changes, just like different seasons of life, the work that you're doing or the passions that you have evolve as well. So it's went into then, when I sold that studio, I moved again into podcasting because I wanted to share guided meditations with my students, even though I was like across the country. And then I became a mom, and then that led me to doing like prenatal and postpartum meditations, which then led me to my book that's all around like meditation for the family. So it's always been kind of this through line that I've had, kind of like this support system that I've had in my life. And my work has always kind of reflected that back to others that really benefit from this sort of work as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm very interested in the family meditation.
Mhm.
The extent that we do is like when my daughter's like freaking out, sometimes I'll be like, okay, you need to take a deep breath. And she actually like listens and does. She like stops and takes a deep breath and goes, "Whew." And then sometimes like we'll do like three of them together. And I find that it actually like really does help her. Um, but that's about it. So tell me about this family meditation thing.
Yeah, that's amazing though. Don't discount that, especially with your little ones. And my son and your daughter are almost the same age. And so like that age group in particular, like even introducing this idea of like your breath can help regulate your
Hmm.
feelings or your experiences is so powerful for them, even like when they're little. And I always like to, often I hear from people that either meditate themselves or just like you described a little bit ago about how people will, it's like they know meditation is quote good. I'm doing the air quotes, like good for you, but they don't know how to do it or like what the benefits actually are. But they want to introduce it to their children. So they'll be like, how do I talk to my kids about meditation? Or I have a 3-year-old or I have a 13-year-old. And really, when you can start early, just like you're doing, is amazing. And introducing this idea of like, we are so much more in control of our body and our mind and like our heart than we think. And giving this foundation of teaching our kids how to be introspective at any age is such a beautiful and powerful thing that we can share with them. So I always think that, starting small, whether having, taking a few deep breaths or, talking about your feelings. So I think about, I can't speak for you, but in our household, we're working through a lot of like that toddler frustration and anger where it just kind of like there's a lot of frustration. And so, we might do an exercise where we talk about, what the feeling actually is, and then take a big deep breath in. And then when we breathe out, it's like we're releasing that anger, that frustration. Like that's a mindfulness practice. Like
Hmm.
that's absolutely good enough. And then as your kids get older, when we lay that foundation for them, then we can just start building upon that, maybe giving them like some more complex practices, or maybe you guys can start like meditating together. Like one of the best ways to talk to your kids about meditation is just to start the practice for yourself, model it for them, talk about why you do it and how it makes you feel. And then, like, with open arms, welcome them in to see if they want to kind of do that as well and just let it be really kind of light and easy
Yeah.
and inquisitive.
Hmm. Yeah. Have to look more into the family meditation. My husband's actually a certified yoga instructor,
Love
and
it.
it's so funny though because he's a concrete worker, so he pours concrete. You wouldn't think like this guy who labors is also a yoga instructor. Um, but I know he's like really big into breath work and stuff
Mhm.
like that. So like even before bed, we'll be like laying in bed and he's doing these like breath work exercises and stuff. And I'm just like, I'm gonna go to sleep. So,
He
but I
sounds
do,
fun.
yeah. So I do find though, so I struggle with sleep in pregnancy.
Mhm.
Um, especially my first trimester. I thought that it kind of went away, but lately I've been like struggling again. Um, and then toward the end, sometimes a little bit. But I've found that like sleep meditations have really helped me. So putting on a sleep meditation to fall asleep um, is something that does help me. And I haven't tried it this pregnancy, but I was thinking about it when I was listening to yours, and I'm like, oh, I should play this when I'm going to sleep because that's like usually when I listen to guided meditations.
Yeah, it's so helpful not only like listening to one to fall asleep, like in the short term, but also what we know as studies tell us that a regular meditation practice, even just listening to something as we fall asleep, can help to improve our sleep in the long term as well. And so, sometimes we joke, or my mom likes to joke that like I sleep with a lot of people because, there's always like, I think I could probably the most popular episodes on my podcast. And I've been doing it for 5 years. There's like 350 of them. They're always like sleep, anxiety, and then like morning meditations. Those are always, I could probably make those every single week and people would be happy. But there is something about listening to a guided meditation. And I think it distracts the mind just enough. And I'm curious, so like what is the piece of pregnancy that you think keeps like, is it the discomfort or like for me sometimes like sleep has just gotten harder as I became a mom because my brain is just so much busier with like that kind of mental load. But like what is it that's keeping you up? Do you know? Or it's just like
Well, it
general?
started with my first, and like I've heard that it can be like basically a pregnancy symptom. So
Yeah.
with my first, yeah, I just couldn't shut my mind off. And same thing happened with my second, same thing happened with this one. But outside of that, I have no problem falling asleep. Like when I'm not in my first trimester, when I like even getting up to like nurse my kids at night, I could go nurse them, go back to bed, pass out, like not toss and turn, not anything, like no problem
Amazing.
falling asleep except for when I'm pregnant. I just, it's like the other night I woke up at 3 in the morning. I think probably my toddler kicked me or something. She was kicking me off the bed actually. And then I was up from like, and I don't ever look at my phone. Like if I'm having trouble sleeping, I never like turn on a device or anything.
Mhm.
Um, Pretty much just lay there. But I did end up checking my phone and it was like around 3 o'clock. And then I remember hearing my husband's alarm go off and it goes off at 5. And I'm like, ugh, like I was just like tossing and turning the whole time. And it was so frustrating. Um, and I try like breathing, just try doing different things and just like have a really hard time sleeping. I don't
Yeah.
really get like uncomfortable until like really toward the end. But I feel like with my last pregnancy, I slept great. Like at the end, I didn't even get up to pee or anything. Like I just slept.
That's amazing.
um, yeah, but this pregnancy so far, I felt like the insomnia kind of went away and then it kind of came back.
Mhm.
But I haven't tried the sleep meditations again.
Yeah, I think there's such a powerful tool and like such a simple tool because it's almost like when you fall asleep with like the TV on, like it gives you just that right amount of direction for your brain. So it's not like wandering to all of these different places and thinking about to-do lists or thinking about, oh, I need to do this because this is coming up, or did I remember to do this thing? Like all those places that our minds go. And when someone's just giving you direction to, breathe a certain way or giving you some kind of like a guided visualization where you're visualizing that you're out for a walk somewhere, like a body scan. I think it gives your mind just enough direction where it can tune in to what's happening and it can quiet down. So then you can kind of like ease off to sleep. Like I
Hmm.
think of it as like when you're bowling and you put the little bumpers in so you don't get like a gutter ball either way. Like it just keeps you on track just enough so that we don't get this full like mental gutter ball, which I find is so easy to do, especially since I became a mother. It's like, when isn't your mind spinning a million, miles a minute?
Hmm.
And it really helps. And it also like the piece, if you have a guided meditation specifically for sleep, that's designed to really not only then quiet the mind, but to also quiet the body, like to quiet down that fight or flight mechanism. So then you can kind of ease yourself to sleep, whether you're falling asleep for the first time, or what I hear a lot from students and clients is like when they wake up in the middle of the night and then it's really hard to like go back to sleep in those
Mm-hmm.
moments, that like a
Mm-hmm.
guided meditation in that time can kind of help
Right.
get you back to sleep faster.
Mm-hmm. That's usually what my pregnancy insomnia is. The first time I fall asleep, I have no problem. But like if one of my kids wakes me up or I get up for any reason, then I toss and turn and have struggle going back to sleep, which, like I said before, usually is not me. I'm
Yeah.
usually fine going back to sleep. Um, and I also forgot that I did go through like a season where I did meditate and I actually really liked it. This has to be like, I want to say 2014, 15, somewhere in there. And I was traveling a lot and just like picked up a couple of meditation practices and brought them home with me. And even I remember like sitting in my room at night and doing deep breaths and like imagining basically, I can't remember exactly how it was, but it was like three chords. And like you're imagining them kind of like being braided, like from your tailbone up to your, through the top of your head.
Mhm.
And like each were a different color and each represented something different, but every breath, like I was taking, like, was like representing the chord and breathing and like, I don't know, braiding it. And then there
Yeah.
was like another one where I'd like breathe in through my sacrum and breathe out and then like breathe back in and breathe out through like, I don't know the name of the chakras, but through my head.
Yeah.
What's that one called?
Yeah, the crown
The crown.
chakra.
Okay.
Yeah.
But like basically, um, I really liked it and I forgot like why I ended up stopping, but I did enjoy it when I did it.
What did you feel like the benefit was at that time? Like what was so enjoyable about it?
For me, it was just like a part of my night routine. Like it was just like a way of unwinding for
Mhm.
me, of just like letting go of the day, unwinding before bed. I'd meditate a little bit, do some stretching and like read and go to sleep.
Yeah.
So I feel like as you get older or as life changes, it gets busier, right? Like even
Yeah.
last night we put the girls to bed, like somehow they slept through the fireworks. It was really loud by our house, but my husband and I like sat in the backyard and just like watched them and talked. And then like we came inside and I was like, it's 10:30. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like it's like you feel like I'm like, oh my gosh, it's already this time. Like I gotta get to sleep right now. Like I don't have time
Yeah.
for anything else, you know? Like I feel like that's how I feel every night.
Yeah, and I love that you're sharing that because I think that's something that so many of us feel. And like
Hmm.
studies tell us that even 8 minutes a day of meditation is enough to get the mental, physical, and emotional benefits. So when I work with people that, are incredibly busy, whether it's because their parents or career or anything in life where they're just really kind of jam-packed in their day, is I always tell them that if you really feel like you can't find 8 minutes in your day, which one is probably unlikely, but two, if you really feel that way, start doing 8 less minutes of something that isn't serving like your greatest and highest
Yeah.
good. So for me, that looks like, scrolling on social media or, whatever, online shopping just to add things to my basket to never purchase them. I don't
Yeah.
know if that's like an ADHD thing, but it's a thing that I do. But do just 8 less minutes of that and you'll find your time to meditate. And the thing that's really cool about a meditation practice, especially when we feel like we're too busy, is carving out that little bit of time can be enough to sort of slow down that spinning where we don't
Hmm.
feel like we're constantly like chronically behind and like we're just trying to keep up. So it's not only the thing that like we probably need most when we feel that way, like we don't have time for it, but it's also so much easier to incorporate into your day than we think. We think it has to be like 30 minutes or 60 minutes. Like
Right.
it's not.
Right. Or if you're like me, it's like the buildup of an idea in your mind like takes more time and energy than the
Yeah.
actual thing. It's like I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, if I would have just like sat and done it, it would have been over and I would have done it
Mhm.
versus like this buildup of like, well, I got to do this first. I got to do that. I better, like I build
Yeah.
things up to like this huge thing. And I'm like, that took me 2 seconds to get done. Why did I not just do that? But I would love to talk about like some of the benefits. What are
Mhm.
some of the health benefits of meditation?
Yeah, so some of my personal favorite ones, I love how meditation changes your brain. So there's a woman named Sarah Lazar out of Boston. She has some really, for like my research paper people out there, she has some really incredible studies around how regular meditation, so when you're meditating every day for usually around 8-ish weeks, rewires your brain to basically have smaller physiological anxiety responses and to have a greater ability to focus and concentrate and regulate your emotions. So, basically, what's happening when we're meditating is the prefrontal cortex, which is that part of the brain responsible for focus, concentration, emotion regulation, that gets activated. And we end up getting denser brains in that area, meaning there's more neurons, there's more surface area, a greater capacity to like use that part of our brain. Where on the flip side, the amygdala, which is like the pain, worry, fear, anxiety center of the brain, that quiets during meditation. And so over that regular time, about 8 weeks, the amygdala actually begins to shrink. And that's the part of the brain responsible for kicking off the fight or flight mechanism. So then we actually start having like smaller physiological anxiety responses. So I love that, but also in terms of like health benefits, it's so good for our heart, right? Like a lot of there's this big link between stress and heart disease,
Mhm.
helps to lower our blood pressure if we have high blood pressure, increase circulation, like emotionally. It tends to make you a little bit more compassionate, more open minded, of course, reducing stress and like feeling more calm. I really like meditation specifically when you're pregnant because it's been shown to not only potentially help um, during the pregnancy to, like, of course, blood pressure, all of those different, like, still getting the physical benefits of meditation. But it's really interesting. There's some studies, and I'm sure, Liz, that you've come across these in your work around how it can help reduce like fear and worry around labor and delivery, help reduce like prenatal anxiety and depression, which is something I think we don't talk about enough, how you can still have anxiety and depression even when you're pregnant, or
Mhm.
you can have a great fear around different aspects of pregnancy if you are pregnant after a loss. There's so many different, factors. But it's also been shown to help women build their bond with baby during pregnancy and to feel more connected with the baby within when you meditate during pregnancy. So, since I'm
Yeah.
currently pregnant, those are some of the benefits that are on the forefront of my mind. But I imagine in your work, you must do some meditation or like with your clients, or um, I imagine you incorporate some of this into what you do.
Yeah, I don't personally like do meditations with them, but I send them
Yeah.
links to different ones.
Mhm.
I didn't do a lot of it in my first birth, but with my second, toward the end, actually, probably at least for the last month, probably two, I was listening to meditations daily,
Mhm.
pregnancy ones, just really focusing on because I wanted a different experience with my second. I planned a different experience. Although there was a lot of things with my first that were like that happened that was completely out of my control.
Mhm.
I knew the likelihood of that happening again was slim to none. And so I knew I was going to be at a birthing center with my second. I knew there was not going to be an option to have an epidural or anything like that. And
Mhm.
I really wanted to just like mentally prepare myself because my first was very long. And very, very tough. Um, but also, like I said, there were so many things that affected that. Sometimes you can do like everything right, but the baby's just like not in the right position. And
Mhm.
um, I learned quickly with my second birth that like when I was at 5 centimeters with my first, that was harder than 10 centimeters with my second. Because of the
Oh.
way that she was positioned, because of
Mhm.
everything in my labor. So my second one, I did really, I knew that I needed to be mentally strong. And something that I've actually been thinking about lately is I've never met somebody who said, I was going to make a reel about this on Instagram because I have a lot of people that are like, I'm going to try for an unmedicated birth, but if I get an epidural, that's fine, which I think is totally fine. I think for me, I don't care what kind of birth you have. I care that you feel informed, that you feel empowered, that you feel educated, that you were the driver's seat making
Mhm.
the decisions in your birth. But I have a lot of people that are like, I really want to try unmedicated, but if I need an epidural, I get it. Anybody who's ever said that to me has gotten an epidural because they haven't done the mental preparation. If you actually want to have an unmedicated birth, you have to mentally prepare like a mofo. And I think
Yeah.
that that includes a lot of these meditations. Like it includes a lot of those types of things because I don't know many people, at least in this generation. I feel like in other generations, people just didn't get epidurals or different things like that. But now birthing, especially in the hospitals, like the epidural rate's super, super high, which again, like I said, is fine,
Mhm.
totally. But for the people who like want to prepare for something different, you have to prepare. You can't just like
Yes.
show up and expect that things are going to go your way, especially birthing in that environment. And so I knew going in with my second, even though I was birthing in a birthing center, I'm like, I knew that I had to be mentally strong because I had felt contractions before and I had felt the relief of an epidural before. And I'm like, I'm going to try for something different this time. And I did those guided meditations constantly. And there was like specific ones for like different state, like releasing fear about labor, doing a bunch of different things. And then when I was actually in labor, like my husband remembers, I was laying on the bed listening to meditations in my labor. And like an hour after that, we left for the birthing center. And then I had her 3 hours later. So it went really
Wow.
fast at the end. but but while I was laboring at home and when it started to get really tough, I was listening to those meditations. So, although I say I don't meditate, I have used it at stages in my life, but I do agree. I do use it in my work. Like a couple of my clients, I'll send them stuff. I'll be like, hey, start listening to this. Or if they're in early labor, there's ones that I'll go to and they're like, okay, I feel contractions coming on. And I'm like, okay, like, if you feel like you can rest. If you feel like you need to do something, do these things, listen to this meditation. And I'll send them those things just because I feel like it can really be a tool, and empowering because it helps you tap in
Mhm.
and be present in your body, but also like it's weird. It like gives you a presence in your body, but also kind of an escape.
Yeah. And there's such a piece of meditation that goes hand in hand with that mental resilience piece, which I
Yeah.
think is like so much of what you're describing. And it's you're on your third now. So you're a pro at this. I'm just on my second. But my first labor and delivery was definitely not an experience that I necessarily hope to replicate. And it was similar, like without going into too many details, it's just those things where it was just like out of my control. I don't know. He was stuck and under stress. He wasn't going anywhere. It's just it was what it was. But it's interesting because I've been thinking a lot about these things too with my second in terms of like when I was meditating the first time or during my first pregnancy, it was more about like accepting the changes in my body and like connecting with my baby and like opening up my heart to like this new season of like being a mother. Where now the second time around, especially now that I'm in the third trimester, is it's a lot more around kind of the mental resilience of preparation for what I know is coming. Because I think the first time, at least for me, there was a piece of like ignorance is bliss.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can have all the information you want, but until you're like giving birth, like how do you really like know what that's like until you've done it?
Mm-hmm.
And so this time around, like my practice is a little bit more around like that mental resilience, also like being in that newborn stage again, or like, reconciling these feelings within my heart of like, my son and I are so close. And then now my daughter is going to come along and like our little family of this size is now going to be a family of this size. And something that I love about meditation that's, I think I described it earlier as like it just was this through line through my whole life is that it really is this kind of strong foundation and anchor that you can utilize and I can utilize differently depending on like what we need. And and it's the same reason why like a lot of athletes meditate, right? And they do like different visualizations and like they use meditation to build their mental resilience and to increase and improve their physical performance as well. Like those are the types of things that we can do for birth. And then as you start to transition into like then postpartum, like meditation can help with, with other things like postpartum rage or anxiety. Like I developed really intense postpartum anxiety the first few weeks of my son's life around his sleeping. Like I just didn't sleep for like weeks because I was convinced like if he was sleeping and I fell asleep, something bad would happen and I would sleep through it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not necessarily like a particularly anxious person outside of that, but like
Yeah.
hormones and everything postpartum, it can just turn the volume up on anything
Right.
that kind of was underneath the surface. But then meditation was there again to then help with that piece, or like, when you are feeling those intense feelings of like rage or frustration, like you can use meditation to alleviate that as well. And it just kind of helps to like smooth out the waves that you're
Right.
experiencing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, postpartum rage definitely is like something that hits.
Yeah.
Yeah, just feeling like, especially with my first, I feel like with my second, again, like just completely different. With my first, I had so much anxiety. Um, and I also feel like we're like sold so much BS too,
Oh, I think
you
from like the
know?
minute you get those two little pink lines, you're sold a lot of BS.
Right. So I I was tracking everything, every second she slept, every time she was nursing, like everything. And
Mhm.
it gave me actually a lot of anxiety. And just I remember like, yeah, being frustrated at her because she like wasn't sleeping and not understanding because she's so tired and then she can't communicate. And you're like, oh my gosh. And I just remember like feeling like, where is this coming from? Like, I've never felt this angry in my life. And
Mm,
I know it's not at her. Like,
mhm,
where's this coming from? What do I do with it?
mhm.
And just all of that. And I think that, I mean, I've never meditated postpartum with either of mine. So maybe that's something I can like carry into this next one. Um, because I feel like, yeah, there's so much that comes up postpartum.
So much that comes up, and everyone, I mean, this better than I do, but everyone experiences it so differently and at
Yeah.
different stages too. Like we think about, oh, it's just those first few weeks when everything's up and down. No, you can, experience all sorts of things for a very long time after you've had a baby. And I think about especially like postpartum rage, which we don't talk enough about. And I think, everyone wants like everything that has to do with pregnancy and babies to be like sunshine and rainbows. And like it can be that, but also it's not always that. And I think it's
Right.
important that we talk about the messier parts too. And in terms of like the postpartum rage, I think of it as like it feels like you're living in this pressure cooker or like this little Instapot. And then meditation, even if it's just taking like these little breaks throughout the day or each day taking a little break, it's like alleviating some of that pressure from the pressure cooker so you don't like completely blow your lid, because it does feel like something that can just be like bubbling and bubbling, and it's just like that pressure is getting like greater and greater and greater, and it's always just that one little thing that then you like blow your lid out, whether it's like you have a newborn and you're recently postpartum, or like you have a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old or whatever. It's never the actual little thing that happens that
Right.
then makes you snap at your kids or cry or whatever it is. It's all of that pressure that's been building up for days or weeks or, months. And then it's the one little thing that pushes you over the edge. And so I think of meditation as like the pressure valve, and like just opening it for a few minutes to alleviate some of that pressure. So then hopefully we never get to that full like blowing your top moment.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, so another thing I want to talk about postpartum is resentment.
Mhm.
I think that, I mean, obviously resentment can happen in any stage of our life, but I think with postpartum, with different parental loads,
Yeah.
um, and I think also, I mean, it's just lack of support as from a society in general. And then we're depending on ourselves and our partner for everything when we were like weren't meant to live that way.
Mhm.
And I think it's really easy to be resentful, even when, I mean, even over the silly things, right? Like I remember laying in bed and my husband just like sleeping through the baby crying.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there with like my nipples hurting, baby crying, and I'm like,
Yeah.
like, oh, must be so nice to sleep. Just even little things
Yes.
like that, but obviously it can be larger things too. Um, like how could maybe meditation help you overcome resentment?
Yeah. So, what fun things I like to talk about, like anxiety, rage, and resentment. So, like some of my favorite things to talk about. But I mean, it is true. Resentment is absolutely there. And I think you hit the nail on the head. There's so many things that I remember really vividly, even though, my husband and I had kind of talked about what the division of childcare would look like. And we, have two very different jobs and even though we had talked about, he had so many weeks of paternal leave and then he was going to go back to work and kind of his work like resumed. And I knew this, we had agreed upon this, but there's something about you just get to wake up and take a shower and eat uninterrupted, get
Yeah.
dressed like an adult and leave and have a day and then come home. Even though I knew this was going to happen, there were some mornings I felt so resentful of this. And it's just
Yeah.
or even it's like when you are describing your bedroom, it's like you're in my bedroom too, where you're like, what the
Yeah.
heck? Enjoy your restful sleep over there, buddy. But
Mhm.
I think it's something that is so present or can be so present. And it also can kind of be this little sneaky silent thing because it's
Yeah.
like you never true feelings of resentment. It's usually starts as something else and then it starts to compound and it starts to creep up on you. And then before you know it, it's resentment, right? Like it can
Mhm.
start as just sleep deprivation, or it can be jealousy, or it can be feelings of, not being valued, right? All of these things that then can start to compound before you know it, it's full blown resentment. And something that I think is really useful about meditation is that it teaches you how to be an objective observer of what's happening within you and around you. So there's a big piece of meditation in which we're just observing without judgment. And I think where it becomes a slippery slope with resentment is that we do have there's such an emotional piece to it and a judgment piece of the self and of others, where you're like, oh, I know I shouldn't feel resentful about this, or you're judging yourself for how you're feeling. Where when you use meditation to kind of sit and check in with how am I actually feeling? Like as if you and I were to switch places and I were to ask you how are you feeling today? Or
Mhm.
what's going on in your heart? And I would just listen. Meditation teaches us how to do that for ourselves. So then we can kind of identify some of these things wow, you know what? I'm really not feeling very seen or valued today. And I think it helps to kind of stop resentment before it builds too deeply, or before those cracks become too deep, because you're able to observe what's happening within you and around you without judgment. And then you can do something about it. Because when we start judging, or when we start telling ourselves this narrative around how we're feeling and whether that's good or bad, or we should or we shouldn't, it gets really hard to actually do something about it, as opposed to just sitting and observing and being like, how am I actually doing? Which I think is so important postpartum as well, because those first few months of having a baby, I always describe it as you feel like you don't have time to do anything and that you didn't do anything all day at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just go, 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 go. And it's you never just stop. And you're so concerned, as you should be, about caring for this thing that is solely dependent on you. But when do
Mhm.
we take that little bit of time just be okay, pause button. But how am I doing? And what's happening for me and within me, what am I feeling? And I think that can give you such a clear snapshot of what's going on, and then you can do something about it if you
Mhm.
choose. But
Mhm.
if we don't look at it, we don't kind of look at, I also think of resentment as, I think in my book I describe it as a piece of moldy cheese forgotten in the back of the fridge. And then all of a sudden you pull it out and you're like, "Ugh, look at this thing. Like it's
Yeah.
horrible." Like it's,
Right.
just like resentment is like that. Like we just push it back, push it back, push it back. And before you know it, it's like this disgusting piece of molded cheese that's been there for like 2 months. And then you're like, look how ugly this thing has become. Look how gross this thing has become.
Hmm.
And so kind of doing this like little bit of maintenance work, checking in daily, I think can really help to not be pushing those things all the way deep down, trying to forget about them until they're just like too awful to ignore.
Hmm. Right. So what about for people, I guess, listening who are like, okay, I've tried meditating, I can't do it. I'd love to try to like make it a part of my practice, but I'm not sure
Mhm.
where to start. What would you advise?
I think a guided meditation is a great place to start. Just like you said, someone's, kind of done the work for you. You don't have to overthink it. You can just like pick a topic and hit play.
Hmm.
If that doesn't feel like a good fit for you, doing a daily check in. So I always recommend like the first few minutes of your day or the last few minutes of your day, especially when you're a parent, like the day gets so chaotic. If you're like, oh, sometime today I'll get to my meditation, like we know we're not going to get to it because there's just too much that's going to pop up.
Yeah.
So, very beginning of the day or the end, you can do a simple check in. How is my body feeling? What thoughts am I having in my mind? And how is my heart doing? And then just taking a few deep breaths. So, practicing being an objective observer. And then another place that I really like to start is going to be kind of that sleep meditation, because sleep is the foundation for like everything. If you're building a house, you need a strong foundation. Like that's what
Hmm.
sleep is for
Hmm.
us. And so maybe doing some kind of a body scan, or there's a breath where you make your exhales longer than your inhales, or listening to a sleep meditation. Like that's usually a really easy way to integrate this into your daily life. And remember, you only need 8 minutes. So like we're not going to make this a thing that feels like another thing we have to do on our to-do list. It's like our little 8 minute break, our 8 minute um, release of the pressure valve for us each day.
Hmm. Yeah, that's good. And then for people listening, what's the name of your book? Where can they find it? Tell us a little bit more about your podcast as well.
Sure. So my book is called Mindful in Minutes, which is the name of my podcast, a meditation guide for the modern family. And so it talks all about my experiences in the first few years of motherhood, but then it really teaches you how to incorporate meditation in very simple but powerful ways into your family at any stage. So everything from prenatal all the way through, you have teenagers or adult children. Like, how do you personally use meditation and how can you integrate it into your family? And there's a partner meditation section in there, well, that has a whole part on resentment. So if that part speaks to you. And then I have two podcasts. One is called Mindful in Minutes, which is the one that's been around for longer. It has like 350 free guided meditations, all less than 20 minutes. And then I have one called Meditation Mama, which is fertility, prenatal, and postpartum meditations. So that one's a little bit more niche, but if you are in that certain period of life, I have meditations over there as well. I started it when I had a pandemic pregnancy, which now I know you had one as well because our kids are almost the same age. And
Hmm.
it was my pet project when I was pregnant at home, not leaving, and really needed meditation. So I started just recording them and sharing them for other people who needed them.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I will include links to all of this in the show notes. And then also on social media, I know that you put clips to your meditations up there and share a lot as well. What is your social media handles?
So it's at Yoga for You online, pretty much everywhere.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. I just want to thank you so much, Kelly, for coming on the podcast. I feel like I feel like meditation is, some people hear it and they're like, oh, cool. And some people are like, nah. So I like having these conversations because even for me, I'm like, wait, I have meditated before. So I wasn't even thinking about it before this. I'm like, yeah, meditating's great. I just can't bring myself to do it. But I'm like, wait, I have done it at different stages in my life and I've always found it useful and really liked it. So it definitely is something that I should incorporate back if at least the sleep meditations because I've been struggling. Um, so yeah, I like having these conversations because I also feel like it's motivational and I feel like it's one of those things too that sometimes people forget about, like, oh, that is a tool that I could use, or that is something like I've been struggling emotionally with this or that, like maybe I could try guided meditation. Maybe I could try something different. to see if that'll help me in this season of life. So I just want to thank you so much for all of your wisdom and expertise. And also, since the podcast is called Morning CHAVA, I like to ask, do you drink morning CHAVA? And if you do, how do you take it?
I do, and I take it fast, immediately, and black.
First thing.
Yeah, first thing. I'm just one of those people. It helps just get my brain moving. But I do. So that's fast, immediately, and black. That's my coffee order.
Nice. Awesome. Thank you again so much for coming on the podcast. I'll include all the links in the show notes, and I look forward to listeners hearing this.
Oh, thank you so much for having me and letting me share what I love.